Picture this, it's 11:38 p.m. on December 25, 1991. A man sits alone in the Kremlin, preparing to deliver the most consequential resignation speech in modern history. Mikhail Gorbachev is about to officially dissolve the Soviet Union, ending 69 years of communist rule and forever changing the global balance of power. But what led to this moment? How did a superpower that once rivaled the United States crumble in just 4 short months? The answer lies in a series of dramatic events that began with tanks rolling through Moscow streets and ended with the red flag being lowered from the Kremlin for the final time. The seeds of destruction were planted on August 18, 1991, when hardline communist officials decided they had seen enough. Gorbachev's reforms, known as perestroika and glasnost, had unleashed forces they could no longer control. Eastern European countries were breaking free. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and now even Soviet republics were demanding independence. At 4:30 a.m. that morning, a delegation of high-ranking officials arrived at Gorbachev's vacation villa in the Crimea. They weren't there for a friendly chat. These men, including the head of the KGB and the defense minister, presented Gorbachev with an ultimatum. Sign a decree declaring a state of emergency, or we'll do it ourselves. Gorbachev refused. Within hours, he was under house arrest, his communications cut off from the outside world. The coup plotters announced to the world that Gorbachev was ill and unable to perform his duties. They declared a state of emergency and rolled tanks into Moscow's streets. But they had made a critical miscalculation. They underestimated Boris Yeltsin, the charismatic president of the Russian Republic who had become Gorbachev's political rival, and ironically, would now become his unlikely savior. Picture the scene. Thousands of Muscovites gathered around the White House, the seat of the Russian parliament, forming human chains to protect it from the advancing tanks. Then, in a moment that would define Russian history, Yeltsin climbed onto one of those very tanks. Standing on the armored vehicle, his white hair catching the wind, Yeltsin denounced the coup as illegal and called for Gorbachev's immediate release. The image was broadcast around the world, becoming an iconic symbol of resistance against authoritarianism. What happened next was extraordinary. Instead of opening fire on the civilians, many soldiers began to question their orders. Some tank crews even switched sides. The coup plotters, who had expected swift victory, watched their support crumble within hours. Here's what most people don't realize. The August coup wasn't just about removing Gorbachev. The plotters feared the new Union Treaty, scheduled to be signed on August 20th, which would have decentralized Soviet power and given republics unprecedented autonomy. They saw this as the death of the Soviet Union and acted to prevent it. Ironically, their coup attempt achieved exactly what they were trying to prevent, but at lightning speed. By August 21st, just 3 days after it began, the coup had completely collapsed. The plotters, realizing they had no support, called off their operation. Some were arrested, others fled. Gorbachev was released and returned to Moscow, but he came back to a fundamentally changed country. The failed coup had fatal consequences for the Soviet Union. It revealed the weakness of central authority and emboldened independence movements across all republics. More critically, it elevated Boris Yeltsin to the status of a national hero while simultaneously weakening Gorbachev's position. In the weeks following the coup, the Soviet Union began unraveling at breakneck speed. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Baltic states, immediately declared independence. Other republics quickly followed suit. Ukraine, the second-largest republic, was preparing for its own independence referendum. Gorbachev desperately tried to hold the union together, proposing new federal structures and negotiating with republic leaders. But the momentum was unstoppable. The coup had shattered any remaining trust in the central government. The final round of the Soviet Union's collapse began on December 1, 1991, when a Ukrainian popular referendum resulted in 91% of Ukraine's voters voting to affirm independence. This was the death blow. Ukraine was the Soviet Union's second-largest republic, and its departure made the union mathematically impossible to sustain. Then came the Belovezha Accords. On December 8, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in secret in a hunting lodge in the Belovezha forest. What they decided there would shock the world. They declared that the USSR, as a subject of international law and a geopolitical reality, ceases its existence. They announced the formation of the Commonwealth of Independent States, effectively replacing the Soviet Union without Gorbachev's input or approval. Imagine being Mikhail Gorbachev at that moment. The man who had won the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Cold War was informed by telephone that the country he led no longer existed. 3 men had dissolved a superpower over dinner. The other Soviet republics quickly joined the Commonwealth. By December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev was a president without a country, with no nation to govern. He had no choice but to resign. On that snowy Christmas evening, Gorbachev sat in his Kremlin office, preparing for his final presidential address. The speech lasted just 10 minutes, but it marked the end of an era. he announced his resignation as president of a country that would officially cease to exist the next day. After the broadcast, Gorbachev walked to his window and watched as the red Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin dome for the last time. In its place rose the white, blue, and red tricolor of the Russian Federation. The Soviet Union, which had once controlled a sixth of the world's landmass, was gone. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. The collapse happened with minimal violence. Unlike other imperial collapses throughout history, the Soviet dissolution was largely peaceful. No major wars erupted between the former republics, no massive refugee crises occurred. It was, in many ways, a miracle of modern history. However, the consequences were enormous. 15 new countries emerged overnight. Nuclear weapons were scattered across multiple states. Economic systems collapsed, leading to hyperinflation and poverty for millions. The geopolitical balance that had defined the post-World War II era vanished. The human cost was staggering. Life expectancy in Russia dropped dramatically in the 1990s. Millions lost their jobs, savings, and pensions. Entire industries disappeared. Many older citizens who had lived their entire lives under the Soviet system felt lost and abandoned. Yet for others, the collapse meant freedom. The Baltic states could finally reclaim their independence. Ukraine could chart its own course. Artists, writers, and dissidents could finally speak freely. Religious believers could practice their faith openly. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. State-controlled economies gave way to market capitalism, though the transition was chaotic and often corrupt. A new class of oligarchs emerged, accumulating vast wealth from privatized state assets. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens struggled with unemployment and inflation. The geopolitical implications resonated far beyond the former Soviet borders. The United States found itself as the world's sole superpower. NATO expanded eastward. The global balance of nuclear weapons shifted. Regional conflicts in places like Chechnya, Georgia, and later Ukraine traced their roots to this moment. Today, more than 3 decades later, we're still living with the consequences of those fateful months in 1991. Putin's Russia seeks to restore some form of imperial influence over former Soviet territories. The conflict in Ukraine can be directly traced back to the unresolved tensions from the Soviet collapse. What can we learn from this extraordinary chapter of history? First, that even the most powerful institutions can crumble with surprising speed. When they lose legitimacy, the Soviet Union seemed permanent and invincible, yet it disappeared in months. Second, that individual actions can have massive historical consequences. The coup plotters' decision to act, Yeltsin's choice to climb on that tank, and the Ukrainian people's vote for independence all shaped the course of world history. Third, that peaceful transitions of power, even in the most dramatic circumstances, are possible. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, the Soviet collapse largely avoided the bloodshed that many predicted. The story of the Soviet Union's final days reminds us that history is not predetermined. It's shaped by human choices, both wise and foolish, courageous and cowardly. In those crucial months of 1991, individuals faced with impossible circumstances made decisions that changed the world. As we watch current global events unfold, from tensions between Russia and the West to the rise of China as a superpower, remember that history's most dramatic moments often begin with decisions made by individuals in rooms we never see, facing choices we can barely imagine. The fall of the Soviet Union wasn't just about the end of communism or the victory of capitalism. It was about the power of people to reshape their world, even when that world seems unchangeable. It was about the fragility of empires and the resilience of human dignity. What do you think was the most crucial moment in the Soviet Union's collapse? Was it the August coup, Yeltsin on the tank, or Ukraine's referendum? In looking at today's world, what lessons from 1991 do you think are most relevant now? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into history as fascinating as I did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We explore the hidden stories and dramatic moments that shaped our world, bringing you the human drama behind the headlines. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest historical investigations. Remember, understanding our past is the key to navigating our future. The Soviet Union's final days teach us that no system, no matter how powerful, is permanent. Change is the only constant in history, and it often comes when we least expect it. Thanks for joining me on this journey through one of the 20th century's most dramatic chapters. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember that you, too, are part of history's unfolding story. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.